Today we're switching things up and have a very fun guest on the podcast. Rachel Workman owns Ghosts of Davidson, a ghost tour located in Davidson, North Carolina, just a few miles outside of Lake Norman. She's lived in the area with her husband Chris and their 3 kids for more than 20 years, and when the opportunity to take over Ghosts of Davidson fell into their laps, they took it. Ghosts of Davidson is a 90-minute stroll through downtown Davidson, a small and charming town that is full of local legends, history, and hauntings. The tour is creepy and meant to be a little scary, but the content is suitable for older children and teens. Private tours are also available, and you can inquire about those on their website, ghostsofdavidson.com. If you're in the greater Charlotte, North Carolina area and want to check it out, you can find a list of available times on their website. We chat with Rachel about why she decided to get into this business, what she loves about it, a little about the local history, and some of her favorite and scariest ghost tour experiences in other cities. Hope you enjoy. Episode 117, an interview with Rachel Workman, owner of Ghosts of Davidson. Okay, so if you're ready to get started, are you ready?
I am ready.
Okay. Well, first of all, welcome to the podcast, Rachel. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank
I
you.
first learned about Ghosts of Davidson a few years ago when I interviewed the previous owner for an article I was writing. How did you get involved with the business and when did you take over?
So this is kind of a crazy story because I've been well known for a very, very long time for being about all things spooky. So my family and I have hosted a big Halloween party every year for the past 14 years. Every year is a different theme. We go all out with it. So I've always loved this kind of thing. And I've also loved history. And I've been, for many years, looking at my own family history and some interesting things about that on Ancestry.com. So we had decided to go on this ghost tour in March, just kind of randomly. My daughter was home from college, and we decided we wanted to do like a family-friendly night out, all of us. So we decided to go on the Davidson ghost tour. And as we're sitting there waiting for the tour to start, we've been on ghost tours everywhere we go on vacation. Charleston, Savannah, anywhere we go on vacation, we will do a ghost tour if a ghost tour is available. So we do one here in our hometown, and I'm just sitting there. I look over at my husband. I'm like, this wouldn't be such a bad gig, is running a ghost tour, being a guide for a ghost tour. And he's like, yeah, actually, that'd be kind of perfect for you. And Mike and Megan Norp were running the tour. Andrew, their son, had started it, but he had since grown up, left town, and they took it over for him for a couple of years. So they come up to our group, and the very first thing they say to us is, so this is our last tour. We're moving out of town, and we never really threw this out there yet, but we're kind of looking for someone to take over the tour. If anyone knows anyone. Of course, my husband and my 3 kids, their heads swivel immediately to look at me. And I'm like, this is really weird. So that's actually how it started, but it was obviously meant to be. This is something that I've really been enjoying.
Yeah, first of all, when I first interviewed him, I thought he's getting older and he's probably not going to be running this for much longer because he was probably 16 or 17 when I first talked to him. But it was such a great business plan that he had put together. And then when I noticed on their social media that someone else had taken over, I was so excited. And then I've kind of been following along to see what you've been doing with it. So could you tell our listeners a little more about what you do during the standard 90-minute tour for the public?
Yeah, so we start in downtown Davidson, which if you've never been there, it's, people describe it as a Hallmark town, like a Hallmark movie type of town. It's super cute. You go there during the day. There's restaurants, coffee shops, little all sorts of old historic homes, plus just fun businesses there, and then of course the college. So we start downtown. We walk down Main Street. We start with the absolute most scandalous thing that ever happened in Davidson. And most of the things I talk about are the most recent thing I talk about on the tour is 1997. Uh, so most of these things are very historical. And we start out with a murder. We see the place where the incident started that night. We see where the person ended up dying that night. All these homes and buildings where the events occurred are still there. And I think that's what's cool. We go down to the train tracks after we talk about the murder story. The train tracks, several incidents there happen right at the Davidson Depot stop on the railroad. And then we end up a couple more historic sites. One of the oldest buildings in town, actually the oldest building in town, besides some that are original to the college. And the college started in 1837. So, like this is an old school. There's some old buildings here. But the oldest building actually in town, separate from the college, was built in 1848. And there was a death, unfortunately, that occurred there as well. So it's some interesting stories. And then we go on down to the Davidson College Cemetery, which has always been owned and is still currently owned by Davidson College. And the cool thing is almost all of the people that I tell the stories about and talk about on the tour are buried there in the Davidson Cemetery. So it all kind of comes together at the end. And the most interesting thing is that first murder I talk about. The murderer and the person he murdered are buried just feet from each other. So kind of awkward in the afterlife, perhaps.
Yes, that was the one that was discussed in the Charlotte Magazine article. Is that correct?
Yes, yeah. So October issue of Charlotte Magazine. If anyone's interested in that, murder on South Street, and I think the most scandalous thing about it is these two residents that were involved. I mean, it was a very, very small town. Of course, it still is a small town, but it was only around 1,000 people back then. So of course, everybody knew everybody. Everybody was related to everybody. And for a long time, the story wasn't even talked about much, just because nobody wanted to offend anybody that was still living, that was connected to the people involved. But it involved the local doctor and the local pharmacist. So of course, these were people everybody knew, well-respected people in town. So it's just kind of a shocking story.
There's also, just to add in a side note, there's a pretty famous murder that happened in Mooresville that's still unsolved. This young woman, Lou Cree, over Cache, Westmoreland. And it's the same kind of thing where, because there are so many descendants still in the area, people are taking sides. And for a long time, it wasn't talked about. And I think it was because people didn't want to upset the families that are still here. The descendants are still here. And it's so unusual because most towns you don't hear about that happening, but because of, I think, the way our area was, the way it was founded, and because there's still so much of that lineage here, it can be difficult to find information on things sometimes.
Absolutely. Yeah, I've found that to be true as well. And it's interesting because even people who have lived in the area, I've lived here it's going on 25 years now, but every time I do the tour, there's people that have lived here a long time. Like, I never knew that. I never heard about that. So it's great because you're learning new information, even if you've lived here a long time.
Exactly. So since you took over, what are some of the ways that you've expanded and added to the business?
So the first thing I did is I just kind of went back to the books and did my research. I wanted to make sure that every story I told, I had actual factual backup for that I could go back to a newspaper article, find these people in a census, make sure these people actually existed. I had the actual dates, names, the buildings and the houses involved, the area involved. I wanted to make sure I did this as factual as possible. I'm a very factual, historic person. So it was fun because I just kind of went back to square one. I wanted to make sure my stories made sense, my stories tied back to something that actually happened. And then, if there was a ghost story also involved, people have claimed because you can't really prove that someone saw or heard a ghost, right? That's kind of hard to prove. Um, but what adds to it is I get the historical facts in the background, and then I have, personal sightings or personal stories of people experiencing things that I can then layer on top of that and say, okay, well, here's what happened here. And now here's what people are saying they experience here. So whether you experience it or not, maybe not, we have captured some interesting things on our tours. So it's kind of cool. But yeah, I went back to the drawing board, and then we're also offering on Wednesday nights. I've been offering a Scoops and Screams tour along with Ben and Jerry's, and that tour is just a mini version of my full tour, but it's more kid oriented, just in case, like, I do have kids go on my normal tour, but just for little kids, in case, like, you have a child that you don't feel is ready yet. I don't talk about murder or suicide or some of those topics. I don't get into the grisly details as much. I do talk about some fun ghost stories. I know a lot of kids are into that, and it's cute to see the interest. I watch the kids' faces. They're just so into it, and they're so interested, and they ask a lot of questions. So I've been doing that Scoops and Screams mini tour. We start at Ben and Jerry's. They get a little scoop of ice cream, and it's cute. They have these little chocolate ghosts they put on top of the scoop of ice cream, and then we talk, about what that building was that Ben and Jerry's is in the past. That was actually the first place in Davidson that anyone ever saw a television in the window. It used to be Withers Electric, and in 1949 they had a television and put it in the window, and that's people gathered around to see a television. A lot of people had never seen one before.
Oh, that's so
cool that the kids really like the history and hearing what things used to be, and saying, hey, this is Ben and Jerry's now, but can you imagine back in 1949, when there was a TV placed right here in the window, right here? And it's kind of fascinating. So they enjoy that. But I've been offering the Scoops and Screams tour, and I'm getting ready at the end of the month to open up and do a second South of Main Street tour. I've been gathering stories for South of Main Street, because normally my tour is more north of Main Street and on up to the cemetery currently.
So then you've talked to someone about the alleged ghosts at the Davidson Ice House location?
Oh, yeah. I can't even tell you. I go talk to people about something else completely, not even on the topic of the ice house. And every single person like, well, the ice house is haunted. I'm like, yeah. Yep. So even when we're not on that subject, someone will be sure to mention the ice house is haunted. I'm like, yes. And I really feel the need to do a tour where we actually go down to the ice house. So I think that would be very exciting for people to be able to do that, instead of just talk about it, actually go there.
I'll go on that, because I've been hearing stories for years about it, but I have no idea where they originated, or if it's more than one ghost, or if there was a murder or an accident there. Like that, those are questions that I think a lot of people have. So I'm excited about that.
Yes. It is interesting. And I'm still digging into it. There's still a lot of stories, I think, that haven't been uncovered. Once you start, you've probably realized, once you start going further back, it's harder to find information. So you got to talk to a lot of people. You got to do a lot of research, but still digging into it. But I'm excited to offer that tour, as well as a few other stops on that tour. Going to be the Kathy Hoyle Funeral Home, which in 1970, or yeah, in the early 70s, it was converted back. The funeral home, the people that were running it were elderly at that point, and converted it back into a residential home, and has been ever since. But for about 20 some years, it was a funeral home. And that's right down there near the ice house. So that's another stop on my tour that's absolutely fascinating. There's several places down there that I think people will be excited about.
Oh, I'm excited. So, and everybody else is going to be excited too. So, for our listeners that don't know this area very well, could you give us a little bit of the background of the history of the town and why it's so perfect for ghost tours? Like, how is it set up for that?
Well, it's a small town. It's still a small town, which is cool. It's completely walkable. So, we're going into not only business district, but residential areas, and not onto the college campus per se, but right up against the college campus. And you can do that all in the same tour because it's so small. The college was here before there was even a town. And that's what a lot of people didn't know about, is that Davidson College started in 1837. There was nothing here. The land was donated by William Lee Davidson, whose father was General William Lee Davidson, and he died in the Revolutionary War in the Battle of Cowan's Ford, which was fought right here in Huntersville. So that's who the college was named after. That battlefield, interestingly enough, is now underneath the lake, because the lake is man-made, right? So the battlefield is under the lake, but General Davidson is still buried nearby in Hopewell Presbyterian Cemetery in Huntersville. So that kind of like starts the precedent of General Davidson. The date of his death, the date of that battle was February 1st. And then I've noticed a connection. A lot of weird, crazy things happened in the month of February in Davidson. So I believe it's that battle and General Davidson's death that kind of set the precedent for the month of February being a little bit of a crazy month here. So there's several stories you'll hear that happened in the month of February.
That's interesting.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. Kind of tie it together. As I start doing my research, I'm like, wait a minute. You start sensing the connections, and you're like, let me look at this a little bit further. And then so, but it's the perfect spot. You got the college here. It's just a very beautiful, small, still a small town feel to it type of place.
So, have you had any spooky or unusual occurrences happen on the tour? I've seen some photos, so.
Yes, you've seen the photos. And I will put anything that we catch on camera that I will post on my social media. So we have, even before the tour is over, I'll have people come to me because I'm like, take pictures, take lots of pictures. Show me if you see anything unusual. So most of the time before even the end of the tour, we will get photos, especially at the Copeland House. It is funny because most of the houses that we go by, the people who have lived in the homes, I feel like they can kind of block out whatever's going on there. Maybe they have to because that's where they live, they own the home, because they'll say, nah, there's nothing spooky going on there. But their neighbors, people that have visited the home, people who have been in the home, us taking pictures outside the home will be like, oh, that house is haunted. There's no other explanation. So yes, we have caught definitely. And I will definitely debunk a picture if I at all possibly can, because photos, you never know with the lighting and whatnot, what it might be sometimes. But there's a couple that I'm like, yeah, I just don't see any explanation for this creepy photos. And, sometimes people are standing there and they're like, those curtains are moving. Those curtains are definitely moving. Uh, and no one is in there, no one lives there, and no one.
That's what I was going to ask you. It's not occupied, right?
The Copeland house, not technically, no. I have seen members of the Copeland family come and go. They still take care of the home, they still own the home, so it's still privately owned. So I tell people, don't go up to it, don't peek in the windows, anything like that. We stand on the sidewalk, take pictures, I talk about it. But it's not, no, it's not really occupied, but they do still own it, and they're back and forth every once in a while.
So you've lived in the Lake Norman area for, I think you said 25 plus years.
Mm-hmm.
That's about the same amount of time I've been here too. It's kind of funny. Are there any other intriguing true crime or ghost stories from this area, not related to your tour specifically, that have piqued your interest over the years?
Yes. So the more I dig into things, the more I find. And you can only fit so many things into, an hour and a half ghost tour. I wish I could do everything. And at some point I will offer different versions of the tour, so that way we can hopefully cover a lot more things. But if you think about it, what has really intrigued me recently, in talking to people that have lived here before the lake was built, and people who know about the history of the lake, is all the spooky things that are underneath the lake. Um, we could talk for days about it, but they'll they will always say Duke Power, will always say when they built the lake. Yeah, we moved all the bodies. Everybody, all the cemeteries, all the graveyards that were underneath the lake, we moved all those. Well, in researching a little bit more, yes and no. They had to, if you think about it, they had to get permission from family members to be able to move remains, or bodies out of there. They wouldn't touch a body unless they got permission. That makes sense. So if you think about it, they wouldn't be able to find the families of everybody that was buried there. So there's definitely cemeteries that were flooded. There's whole towns that were flooded underneath the lake. And of course, like I mentioned, there's that battlefield, Battle of Cowan's Ford underneath the lake. So it's interesting to me, the history of everything that happened there, to build that lake. So I think I want to dig more into that at some point.
There's definitely some stories there, I believe.
Oh yeah. a lot of stuff.
It's amazing the people that don't know all that, when they first move here, and then, they start finding out, going, did you know that there's like whole communities underneath the lake? Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes,
Then
there
all
are.
of a sudden they're like, maybe I don't want to swim in the lake anymore.
Yeah, it definitely has made me pause a time or two. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah. You can't think about it. You just can't think about it. If you're gonna swim, just don't think about it.
Right, exactly. Don't start thinking about it. So you mentioned earlier that you like going on ghost tours in other cities that you visit. I'm also guilty of that too. My family always teaches me about it. But so tell us some notable ghost tours and walks that you've been on in other states, because anybody that's listening to this, we're all in the same boat. We all want to find some good ghost tours. And what are some of your favorites, and why would you recommend them?
Okay, so very, very top of my list. This was a bucket list item for me. And I don't know if my family was as into it as I was, but they indulged me. And we went to Fall River, Massachusetts, where the Lizzie Borden house is. And that was hands down, I think the whole Lizzie Borden story is hands down the most fascinating true crime story in my mind. And yeah, so we toured the Lizzie Borden house, and that I was just over the moon about that. Now, when you look at pictures of us there, and I'm like all excited taking selfies in the places where the bodies were found, and I'm taking pictures of my family, and the pictures of they have like these horrified looks on their faces. And I'm like, yay!
I made it.
But what's really cool about that house is they have painstakingly recreated exactly how it looked at the time the murders happened. And it was the first crime scene in the United States to be photographed also, which is a cool fact. So there are photographs, I mean, blurry, black and white, of course, this was in 1894. But this was the first crime scene to be photographed. So we have pictures of what it looked like. And if you look at those crime scene photos and you look at the house now, and you will see the same wallpaper, the same furniture, the same portraits on the wall. It's crazy how they were able to just recreate everything to look the same. So a lot of fascinating information that I didn't even know going into it, and I know a lot of facts about a lot of murders. As you do probably do as well. A lot. Yes, yeah. The other one that is a little bit closer for people that live in this area, and that's very interesting, Southern Grace Distillery. It's a whiskey distillery in Mount Pleasant, which is a little bit to the east of here. If you just keep going east past Concord, it was originally an old prison.
Oh.
And all the buildings are still there. There's still like a big fence around the whole area. So they do just normal like whiskey tours during the day of their distillery. At night, they do paranormal investigations. And I will say that is the most scared I've probably ever been. They have 2 little cement buildings that were solitary confinement buildings back when it was a prison. And they will lead you on there. You go around with a group and do some things, and then you can go off and explore on your own. But being in those solitary confinements, it's just a very heavy feeling. And we caught a lot of different EVPs and voices in those areas. It got to the point where I was like, okay, I'm ready to leave. And I'm not usually that way. But
well, I'm sure it's also kind of an isolated area if it used to be a prison, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's nothing much out there.
And what was that called again?
Southern Grace Distillery.
Okay. Because I want to put some links in the show notes for these places that you've mentioned.
Yeah. And I just it's funny because I had someone contact me that works at Southern Grace, and he contacted me on social media recently and was like, you're not going to believe the pictures of, I was like, oh, I will believe them. And he sent me some crazy pictures that I can't explain either. But yeah, there was definitely a lot of things there I couldn't explain and didn't even want to explain. So that is not for the faint of heart. I'll tell you that, but that's for, anyone who's really into that kind of thing. That's a must see.
Okay. Thank you for letting us know about that. Check that out. That's a lot closer, although I'm a little scared now. I don't know if I want to do that. It sounds pretty.
I always feel like there's safety in numbers. Like right. I'm not as scared when I go in with a group. I don't, I think once we broke off on our own, it was just me and my husband. Once we broke off on our own, I was like, after a while, I was like, okay, I'm done. In the group, it was fine, but definitely some crazy things happened. But yeah.
Yeah, I did a ghost tour several years ago in Raleigh, and it started in the downtown area, and it was at night. It started in the downtown area and it ended, and I was with my son, who was probably 9 or 10 at the time. It ended in kind of an isolated cemetery off of this side street, and we were all kind of told to separate and walk around. And I kept thinking, I don't feel safe.
I don't want to separate and walk around.
Yeah. Can I stay with some people because I've got my son, and we're, and he had no comprehension of what was going on. He had no fear. He was just running around the cemetery. And I'm thinking, I think we need to go rejoin another group, because I thought we would all stay together and kind of walk through the cemetery. Not to mention that the cemetery was it felt like a mile away from downtown. So that was where we were ending up. So yeah, it can get a little dicey sometimes when you're on these tours.
Yes.
I mean, it's definitely part of the experience, but I will say I can attest that the Davidson tour, everyone's together in the cemetery at the end. Like, you guys are all like in a group.
Yes. Yes.
But even that is kind of spooky because it seems so isolated. It's right in the middle of town pretty much, but it seems so isolated when you walk back into it, and it's not really well lit. Because I know don't you carry a lantern?
Yes.
You're walking through there?
It's normally very, very quiet. I mean, you can hear a pin drop, and it's only a couple blocks from town, right? But as you're walking out there, it's like, it gets darker. There's not as many street lights. It gets quieter, and people kind of notice that because they're like, all of a sudden, where are we going? But one funny story is the first weekend that in August, towards the end of August, when the Davidson students were back on campus. And that first weekend they were back on campus, and I entered the cemetery, and I hear this loud, like, thumping music from a house behind the cemetery, like boom, 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 boom. And people
fraternity party.
And I was like, wow, they're ruining my vibe right now. But that is actually the only time I was a little bit worried, like, uh-oh, is there a party house right behind the cemetery? I haven't heard it since, but it was just kind of funny that night, and we just kind of went along with it. But I felt more like, dancing to the music than telling a ghost story, but we got through it.
Well, when you're running a ghost tour, you have to deal with unexpected things sometimes, right?
Absolutely. You never know what's going to happen. But that's the fun of it, right?
So for anyone that's not local to the area, or anyone that wants to check out this tour, where can they find you on social media, and what is your website?
Yeah, my website is ghostofdavidson.com. And same on my social media, just Ghosts of Davidson on Facebook and Instagram.
Okay. Well, we would like to thank you for joining us today and giving us this inside look of what it takes to run a ghost tour. I'm sure you've inspired a lot of people who maybe want to start their own ghost tour in their own town.
Yeah.
So thank you again. This has been very enjoyable. I'm definitely going to come check out the new and improved tour, or the new and revised tour. I don't know.
Yes.
It's pretty good before, but it sounds like it's just getting better and better as you add on to it and add more work. And I really enjoy your social media updates. You've been doing some great publicity. So
I'm gonna have a very cool post going out today for the first day of October. Something very spooky. So look for it later today.
All right, I'll be sure to share it, and I'll be sure to tease this episode too. Thank you.
Absolutely.
This brings us to the conclusion of this episode of Missing in the Carolinas. If you enjoyed this episode, please do me a favor and give it a 5-star rating wherever you listen to your podcasts. If you'd also like to support the show in a small way, you can buy me a coffee over at buymeacoffee.com, Renee Robertson. I currently don't receive any compensation for this podcast, so every little bit helps me continue producing new content. We're also on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube, so please like our pages and get started on a discussion of the missing people profiled on the show. Do you know of a missing persons case in North or South Carolina that you think should be covered? Email me at missinginthecarolinas@gmail.com with any details you can share. Don't forget to check out our sponsor, Wow Women on Writing, and the great programs and writing contests they have there at wow-womenonwriting.com. Cover art for this podcast was designed by Macintosh Multimedia. All episodes are researched and written by me, Renee Robertson, with sound editing provided by Daniel Robertson. Thanks so much for listening.